Good morning. Welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Gina Apostol this morning in support of La Tercera and in conversation with Ligaya Mishan. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees, those of you who are just joining us. The chat is closed this morning, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase La Tercera from Literati Bookstore in the chat. And the Q&A is available to you, however. If you'd like to interact with us, please feel free to submit your questions at any time. I'll read a selection of your questions at the conclusion of the conversation. And live transcription is available to you as well using the closed captioning icon of the toolbar. If you're watching us later on YouTube, just a reminder that there are always links to purchase books in the description directly below me. And you can subscribe to our channel by clicking the typewriter icon in the bottom right corner of your screen and be kept up to date with all of our At Home with Literati events, which will continue through 2023 once they become available on our channel. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, of course, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping, and a full calendar of our events, both in-store, virtual, in the community, in theaters, etc., is available at literatibookstore.com/event. But most of all, we'd just like to thank you for your attendance this morning or this afternoon or late this evening, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. Without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's author and our moderator. Gina Apostol is the author of the novels Insurrecto, Gun Dealer's Daughter, Bibliolepsy, and The Revolution According to Raimundo Mata. She's the winner of 2 Philippine National Book Awards, the PEN Open Award, and the Rome Prize. She's currently in Rome, but she lives in New York City and Western Massachusetts and grew up in the Philippines. Speaking with her this evening, Ligaya Mishan writes for the New York Times and T Magazine. She has won a James Beard Award and been a finalist for the National Magazine Awards, and her pieces have been selected for the best American anthologies in magazine, food, and travel writing. She has written about books for the New York Review of Books, the New Yorker, and the Times Book Review. The daughter of a Filipino mother and a British father, she grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii. Please join me in welcoming Gina Apostol and Ligaya Mishan into your living rooms.
Thank you so much, John. And so good to see you, Ligaya.
So good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we had decided we're going to just start off with a reading, or is that what we're?
Please.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we never know what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to start off by reading a section of the novel. It comes very early on in the novel. The chapter is called Top of the World. The voicemail was from my uncle, Trono Marino, the honorable mayor, as they called him years after his regime. By the way, can you hear me? Is it okay, Ligaya?
Perfect.
Okay. I'd been calling my mother the entire month. She had no use for Messenger. Skype was dead to her. She owned no computers. She was the last woman in that selfie-happy archipelago to have only a rotary phone. All I had was her voice. During the years I've lived in New York, I admit I never called her much. I hate the phone. I mislay it. I pretend I'm not home. I hate the need to call people. The rest of the family knows. They know they will expect no birthday greetings. They will hear nothing from me when my books come out. They will learn about my readings on Facebook, where all the Filipinos are. I'm on Facebook for my books. I have a phone for my mom. Her voice was girlish, high-pitched, the voice of one I thought to believe too easily in illusion. My mom lived in the future, and the present was a dislocation. She had the trick of making you think it was your existence that gave her joy, partly because of her childish voice, her intakes of breath as she spoke to you, as if her diaphragm and lungs were not formed enough for her thrill. Inday, she said, when it was first detected. I'm so healthy, I just had my tests. She always called me Inday, sounding like she had so many children she had forgotten my name, though I'm her only daughter. But Mom, Chinamor said, my heart is good, my cholesterol is great, my lungs are perfect. All I have is cancer. Without cancer, I'm on top of the world. And she began to hum that song from my childhood. I could see her doing the cha-cha with the cord of the rotary phone, shaking her hips, dressed in satin and silk, lithe and unconquerable in her feline way, like the stray cats that perched on the unfinished cement wall in Mana Marga's dirty kitchen, purring in the security of having so many lives. When she was first told she should have surgery to take out her cancerous breast, she refused. How can you dance the tango if you have only one breast? I imagined her, Adina and Guapa, pearled and perfumed, dancing the cha-cha to Karen Carpenter in her high heels. I keep seeing her in her 70s bouffant, though in her last pictures uploaded on Facebook by Put Put, who never tags me, but still I follow him, her hair has thinned. Her reflexive mode of existence was to go ballroom dancing. She wore high heels to water her orchids in the garden. And when I was a kid watching her use a brown eyebrow pencil to line her lips, she laughed as I stared. Inday, she said, humming, as she did the weirdest things to her face, her deft fingers etching herself into shape. Does it look good, Inday? She asked. Yes, I'd say, and it was true. I grew up with a daring invention of my mom's daily routines. My mom wore her beauty in a way that was not a drag to others. We were just proud witnesses. Nothing marred her grace. People in Tacloban called her Adina and Guapa. That was her nickname, Adina the Beautiful. She emerged from her rituals looking somehow like Gina Lollobrigida, who was famous in Tacloban because she once posed by our fantastical bridge. Adina and Guapa was a silk and organza spectacle from the time of that first dictator, the locus of my memory of my mom. Top of the World was her brother Namorino's campaign song, the one the band struck when Namorino ran for mayor in the 70s. You know that's not a good allusion, Mom, I said. Karen Carpenter did not come to a good end. She told me not to return home. She told me what mattered was that I was an artist. How could I leave New York, she said, when I had my career? I was a hysterical novelist, as she called with pride my vocation. My work on events so forgotten, neither victors nor losers give a damn. It's your dream, Inday. You stay where you are, in Greenwich, to do your art. Greenwich Village, Mom. It says here on the postcard, Greenwich. Stay in Greenwich. So I did. My mother's gift to me was that she believed in all of my dreams, including the stupid ones. She kept up a perfect face, no matter how ordinary or significant the moment, so that neither her illness nor her love sent me home. It was Chuna Merino's voice in my mailbox that told me she was gone. And that is that opening section.
It's such a great section. Thank you for reading that part because it makes me think about how performance, singing and dancing are such a big part of Filipino culture. I feel like every Filipino I know sings really well. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about this because it's not just this character. It's the whole the way you talk about in the elections, the importance of singing, having a song, but also being able to sing, and that making a candidate somehow more viable. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I grew up with a political family, so I did grow up with an uncle who ran for mayor in our very, very small hometown, and I grew up with that sense of performance. Performance and voting and politics, they all came together, which makes it it makes a lot more sense. Given also that I grew up in Tacloban, with Imelda Marcos and that whole performance, that whole piece of where the glamour and the singing and the performative ways of being, of identification, are both hugely profound for the people who are, obviously attached, as well as hugely damaging. So there's this, I think throughout the book, there's this constant kind of doubleness, tripleness about the layers of performance and its effects on Filipinos. Not to say that the joy of it My mom, I'm calling her my mom. But the thing is, Adina and Guapa was really based on my mother. I mean, basically the whole obstruction of the novel was that if it's something that I remembered, even if it was a false memories, I'm going to put it in. So that allowed me to, it ended up being a really long book. But my memory of my mother was this constant doubleness of, wow, I hate that shit. And also, wow, I love my mom. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting, all of these contradictions. You have this line later in the book, you're talking about the Philippines as a country that knows betrayal even as it rolls over, shows another side before it knows itself, has a knack for simultaneity and genius for incoherence, the capacity to live in calm with contradiction. And so it's so interesting that this is both the story of these specific people, this specific family, but a much larger story about a country and a culture. So this idea of living, of betrayal, and it's betrayal that isn't even always, so every performance is a kind of betrayal because of the doubleness of who you really are, who you are pretending to be. But even with the people who are radicals in their youth and then go to work for the man, right? And there are all these transformations that happen so that nobody is one thing. And just, so how, do you think that is something when you think, and how is that in a way related to the whole colonial legacy and exploitation? Is it something that has arisen out of that? You had to learn to live with contradiction to be able to survive?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Ligaya, because of course, if you think about the novel, it's been like the novel's posing a question and trying to figure out the simultaneity, trying to figure out these contradictions that I grew up with, that Filipinos just, I mean, we see it, I think we saw it in the last election. We saw that, we have friends whom we thought we knew all along, and then turns out we don't quite know them, and they probably think the same about us, I mean, I left my high school, I loved them. I left my high school chat group when someone started doing the Marcos stuff, and I said, and they were all apologizing. Most were apologizing. No, we don't mean to be political. But I said, no, you're hurting other. So just all of this stuff, and trying to figure it out, because at the same time, this is your country, this is your family, these are your friends, and they are probably thinking the same thing about you. That you're betraying them, given their very strong whatever beliefs, etc. And then you have a return of of a dictator family, which is hugely troubling, on any level. It's not ambiguous. I think it's hugely troubling that Marcos is president, Marcos Jr. is president. So the book ended up being a kind of exploration of where is it in the way I was doing my immediate family's past? Where could I trace it? And what does my immediate family's past mean? Because my mom was very much in love. It seemed like she was very attached to this great uncle. And I thought she was lying all the time. But it turns out when I was grieving for my mother. I was doing a book on the Philippine-American War. They ended up going together because the figure in the Philippine-American War that I got interested in was this great uncle of my mother who ended up, I was thinking about, when I was doing the Philippine-American War, I was thinking about how Filipinos are it must have been so odd in 1901 or so, when if you were educated, you were doing Spanish, you were doing all of these things, you had your own culture in your own world, but there was a Spanish oppressor. And then suddenly you have the English. And then I grew up only with the English, but there were people who grew up with that kind of cut. And I think that's so weird, that's so weird. 1899 and then 1903, this great uncle of my mother in the research that I did, because I thought, okay, how can I make the Filipino-American War intimate for me? So I checked this guy out, because it turns out he was in the archives. He was in the national, U.S. Congress archives, records, because he was a senator during the Commonwealth. He was an ambassador to the United Nations very early on, like in the 1950s. So, and I thought my mom was lying the whole time. I said, oh, come on, you're from this teeny tiny town. Your great uncle did not become an ambassador to goddamn United Nations. But he was actually the ambassador at the time of the slipper, the foot, the shoe, Khrushchev and the shoe. And it turns out Khrushchev's shoe was being banged because of the Philippine delegation, because they were stooges of the Americans. So it's so you see the layers there. That's my great uncle. Hey, I'm proud. Oh, he's a stooge for the Americans. Hey, that's not good. Why was he a stooge for the Americans? Wait, he was colonized. There was imperial violence against him and against them. And how do you survive? And why did he choose? Okay, that's good. But why did he choose to survive that way? It's like, oh, that's not good. So it's just like constant. And I imagine for all of us. There's even in the ways we have to deal. You go to school, your parents, and you could be more radical than your parents or less radical than your parents. But they're actually in the Philippines. They're very high stakes. They're very high stakes because of imminent erasure of truths, the imminent violence that could come upon one way or the other, given who's in charge, or so violence is very close, and the contradictions that we bear actually have material and physical stakes, so. And I think with the Philippines, we had material and physical stakes that made us move, and the material and physical stakes were genocide. Which we don't acknowledge or think about in history books. But I think that is my thesis, that we're a nation born of genocide. And the whole point about that is that we don't know, because we were educated and brought up and constructed as a nation with a very determined, violent order that produced that erasure. We're not the ones who erased it. We're not the ones who forgot. It was constructed.
Well, the mother says at one point, right, people around her think that she's getting confused about which war, and she says all of them. It's all one war.
It's all of them.
And that just seems like, of course.
Yeah, it's always been.
She's brilliant, really. Like the mother is a brilliant character. Like her usage of language is just extraordinary. There's so many great, disinterrogate is a kind of fantastic alternative to disintegrate, and architect Pelago really gets at something deeper, and system psychosis, is that another?
Yes, system psychosis.
And of course, this is in all of your books. There's this incredible joy in language and seeing all the things that language can do. And here it becomes very specific to all the languages, this kind of tumult of languages that everybody speaks, so that you have, so that there's Waray and Tagalog and English and Spanish and that, for the narrator to come to school and to speak perfect English is regarded as weird, right? And she speaks perfect English because at school you're fined if you speak another language, right? But in fact, Filipinos speak so many languages all in a single sentence. You might speak 3 different languages, right? You'll just dip in to other languages. So, was that something that was your own experience? Did you?
Yeah, one thing that, because the novel was about me trying to remember, this is a pandemic novel, so it's like a grieving novel, it's a memory novel. That's what I just tunneled myself into memory. So one of the scenes that I have in the book is this memory I had of being in college in Diliman, and it was very weird to people that I would just speak straight English. because I was coming from the province. And then we were going, yeah, because we don't really speak Tagalog, because I'm Waray, and so the the weird kind of resistance that we had to Tagalog was you speak straight English. And so there are very different resonances of language. And also, it wouldn't have been natural for us in Tacloban to be doing Taglish, which is a Manila language. Taglish is Manila. It wouldn't have been natural for us in Tacloban. You either speak full Waray or you'll speak English, which is the school language. So it was very weird to me. It's like, why do you think Taglish is any good? It's not even. So you all have your prejudices. You all have your biases, and so of course what's great about writing a novel is that your prejudice is the one that matters.
Why not?
Why not?
I thought it was really, in the Times review, Hari Kunzru says, it's at times bewildering to someone who doesn't share all those languages. It's hard to read a book studded with so many words I don't recognize, and this, of course, is the point. What do you right? So what would you say? Like it's so to read this as somebody who's familiar, but of course I don't know Waray, and yet I love being subsumed into this world that has so much going on, and that the fact that I don't understand everything is part of the pleasure, because in fact also the narrator does not understand everything, even her own mother, right? So I'm just curious, for you when you were writing this, I think, what is it that I think Hari Kunzru quotes Edouard Glissant. There's the right to opacity. So what do you think of that in writing?
Yeah, there are two different things, at the very least, two different points I'd make with that. One is that, but I thought, in my view, this is my simplest. It's my simplest novel. I think line by line, compared to my other novels, I tried to pare down even vocabulary, all of these things. The novel, of course, it moves into the historical space that moves the time structures that in all these weird ways. I think on one hand, I was talking about this with Adrienne de Leon. On one hand, I think it's a very homely novel. It's a novel about home. So homely in that sense. So I think there's something, for me, I'm hoping that people who have that sense of home and being homed and unhomed at the same time might find something there, might find something very homely, very not uncanny, not estranged in the piece. I think that that story, the epic story of returning home, it's that epic, it's very Homeric, that epic of returning home. It's very immigrant story, that epic of going someplace else. But in this case, it's not going to America. It's kind of the anti-immigrant, where you're, or the opposite of the immigrant story. You're going back to the place where you're supposed to be from, and you're still estranged from it. And then you have to make the effort to be part of that world. So in one sense, it's a homely novel in my view. And on the other hand, what I thought was really interesting about what Hari Kunzru was saying was that it was a political move that I was making. He was recognizing, in my view, the political move, which was, I'm going to put all this Waray in there. I'm not going to explain most of it. You can just gloss over it and go and look at the italics. I italicize English, which I think is very funny. So there's italicizing of English. And that he was noting, I think, the political aspect of using all of these multiple languages without apology, saying you need to know this just as much as you need to get to be bewildered, be taken in, be immersed in this world, just as you would with all of the French in Tolstoy. Tolstoy has a lot of French. So that kind of world building that is a political move I thought it was political.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a kind of fantastic destabilization, which reflects the destabilization within the world as well. And so, yes, the reader is following the narrator, right? The narrator has to return and puzzle out something, and then the reader is right there with her. So that all makes sense. I think what I'm curious about is, this is your first novel where you really are writing about things in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And how was that as a shift for you as a novelist? And you say also that was a pandemic novel. So was there something in that moment that made you turn inward in your writing?
Yeah, I was just really surprised at myself during the pandemic, because you know how we are. We're writers, we're out in the world, we're sharing our thoughts with the world. We have this kind of confidence in our ability to and our strength. And I was really surprised by crying all the time during the pandemic. And it turns out it was about my mom. I don't know why it was I was missing my mother. I think there was a comment by my little sister a while ago that said, oh yeah, I never went home. I did not go home for her. I don't know what happened to her when she was dying. She reminded me of that. My little sister, not my older sister. And that really struck me. Actually, the seed of it came when I was going home a few months before the pandemic. And I think that's why, I had gone home, I was at a book fest, and I suddenly had a recognition about how I should change my novel, this is how I can fix this novel, William McKinley's World, that was so hard for me to do. It was a third person novel in the voice of two brothers, Jote and Paco, who are in the revolution, Philippine-American War. One of them has to kill the other because one's a revolutionary, one's a collaborator. But I needed a fix to it because I couldn't finish it. And when I was going home, I realized, it's really about the present time and how we can connect that. And the way to connect it was my mother, because I was going home and I was like, I remembered my sister saying I did not go home from my mom's death. I'm going home now 20 years later. And I missed that. And I was like crying for my mother on the airplane. And I just redid that goddamn scene in my novel, the girl who cries for her mother when she's seeing the islands. And so during the pandemic, because that was only a few months before the pandemic, I guess, I just said, okay, I have time. I'll just redo this novel with this entire other story. So it was the book fest around August 2019. And then I started in earnest. I started doing some revision at home in the Philippines. And so that's what it was, a kind of grief that filled me. And the only way to deal with it in a constructive way, in a way that would move me out of my weeping, was just to write. And the way to write was also to make it very conscious. It's the only time I've been really conscious of using my own life. That's hard. It's very hard to write about real things because they always sound false. They also always sound kind of incredible, like whatever, not true. And so it was consciously an aesthetic project, an aesthetic problem that I was trying to solve by saying, I know it's difficult to create a narrative about things that are so-called real, but I'm going to do it, so it was a conscious aesthetic project that used another aspect of myself, which was the actual mourning, but doing it in a very deliberate way. And so in a weird way, because of those two things, the conscious and the repressed, I'm reading a lot of Freud right now, the conscious and the repressed, it became kind of weirdly fun. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. I've never done it before.
So the original novel is within this novel. or
Yes,
completely drew
yes.
it out? Okay.
The two brothers,
Yeah.
Pote and Paco, I had written those sections a while ago, and then they became a text within the text. And so,
Right.
but I already had someone who was transcribing,
Mhm.
but that person had no background. So I gave her the background of going home to grieve for the mother. So the act of translation and transcription was
Mhm.
already part of the plot. I
Right.
just didn't have I just wanted it to be really background. I made it foreground.
Well, this has been a theme in your other works too. This
Yes, yes,
translation, right,
absolutely.
and the errors that creep in, which are also the errors of slipping from one language to another, which are also the errors of memory and how we
Mhm.
rewrite the past in our
Right.
minds, and fail to remember.
I've
It's
always thought that with that, the thing about translation, which I think making translation the plot, a foregrounded plot, in all of these different novels that I've written, allows a kind of logic for the fragment, for the fracture, for the error, for the layers of truth and meaning that I'm very, very interested in. And so the fact of translation, which also is kind of phenomenological in that is how we do exist in the world. We exist in translation, but foregrounding it, making it explicit, allows, in my view, a way to understand a narrative that necessarily has breaks, fissures, blocks of forgetting, and so on.
I'm curious when thinking about the structure of the novel. I was reading something the other day. I think it was Peter Orner saying something like one of the great con jobs of the world is to think that time is linear.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a con.
because it isn't. And when you think about the structure of a novel, right, there's this expectation that it has this a certain arc and that it reaches a point. I mean, it's a sort of male model of you reach a climax and then that's the end, as opposed to going in circles. Or I mean, there are many structures you could possibly take. When you were writing this, were you also consciously setting out a specific structure that you wanted to follow, or a structure that you wanted to refute? I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so there are several things to that. One is that in all of my books, I kind of already know the ending. And I told my agent, I told Kirby a while ago, a long time ago, I think it was just when Gun Dealer's Daughter had come out. Yeah, I'm writing this novel, and everything is going to end up in a big storm. That's all I say. There's just going to be this huge storm. And so I knew so the structure, one way to think about the structure is if you go home to Leyte, there's going to be a huge typhoon. So that's just the structure. That's just the structure of life. Or like in Insurrecto, if you begin with karaoke, you have to end with karaoke. That's the Philippine Chekhov rule.
Yes.
If you had karaoke in the beginning, it has to finish at the end. So there are just different things, different ways that I think about getting to the end. I don't know how. I didn't know how I'd get to the storm, but I was going to have a storm.
Right.
The end. So one, that's just a way that I work through. I just know the ending. Like I'm gonna say right now, my next novel, it's going to end with a person closing a window, opening a window and closing. So there's going to be a closing of a window. Or a door. A
Spoiler
window.
alert.
I already know someone's gonna do that. I'm just telling you that right now. So uh, I have these ways of thinking about a novel, but in terms of this one, the foreground had originally been the two brothers, and then the background was the person who's trying to transcribe. So the transcription element, I wanted it to be very minimal. I wanted it to be a war story. I wanted it to be like so sad, he's going to kill his brother, la la la, all of these things. But I recognized very much how I, as a writer, fight against that. I maybe one day I'll do something as straightforward as that, but I'm going to be honest, I think if I do something as straightforward as that, it'll be within a messy thing. So I became more interested in it really when I foregrounded the background story of the mother and the daughter. So in terms of structuring, I already had a text that I moved into a text within the text. And there's even more of that because there's still the translator. And I really was interested in the translator, Pastila Nuday, and how she would be, I imagine she'll be a character in a different novel because I'm so interested in her. So yeah.
Oh no, well, I look forward to her reappearing. I'm wondering if part of maybe the messiness. I don't think it's messy, but it's big, it's sprawling, it's complicated.
Yes, yeah.
But is that partly a resistance to the tendency to oversimplify? We want history to be one thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's connected in any way, to this sort of I don't know how to put this. It's the lure of fascism in the Philippines, right? That this is something where that people are drawn to figures who are then prone to fascism, if we can put it that way.
Right.
And how is that? And I can see this, all the struggles in the book with thinking about relatives of mine and either the refusal to believe that certain people did certain things, or saying yes but right, yes, that's bad, but they had good intentions. Look at this good thing that has come out. And then of course seeing how that translates with the Filipino diaspora in the United States and our own politics here. So I'm just wondering, as you were, could just talk a little bit how you address that in this book, and how that, I don't know, and in life, right?
Right. How do you address, you can't, you're right. You can't do it with a linear narrative because, for instance, if you're going to do the collaborator and the revolutionary, and you I know that my novel would not have been a binary of the two. At the same time, that I needed a commentary, in my view, of how to speak to. I think one of the things that's, in some ways, revolution is easier to talk about, or it's easier to move into a storyline, like you can go rah, rah, rah. I mean, the way we have structured our history so that the war against Spain is the one that constructs us, not the war against America, but the war against Spain, because it's so much more pleasant in some ways to think about how we went after it. We won, we did this, we got rid of them. I mean, we got co-opted by the Americans, but we had that revolution. So there's a nice story to it, a nice nationalist story to it. But the thing is, we know how messy that is. So I could have done the nationalist historiographic type of novel where I could have just gone with, one could do a really good novel on Macario Sakay. I mean, he's an amazing figure. I mean, he tried to kidnap, he had a plot to kidnap Alice Roosevelt. It was very fun. It didn't happen. He was instead beheaded, but he didn't go through it, but the Americans executed him. So you could do a really good story, but my problem also with those stories is the move into the nationalist that also doesn't, you need to also see all the different ways that we need to interrogate ourselves. So part of it is that I find myself always interrogating the story that I'm told, and the layers are ways, in my view, of presenting truth, So, given that the questions that you have, and given that truth is about a question, I think truth is a questioning of where we are and how we could be better, and bringing up truths about the Marcos regime is a way not to say, there's only one way to see the Philippines as, fascist, but there's a way to see ourselves and just move into a space, because we're so layered anyway. we could get rid of them too, which we did also. We have done that. So layers are just a way of exposing truths that more, let's say, more pleasing narratives that might be more more pleasing narratives are inadequate.
Yes, that makes sense. I know we're almost ready to go to questions from the audience, but I just have one last question for you, which is more, is there a scene in the book that was the most fun to write for you?
There were so many. I'm going to be honest, everything about recalling my mother was fun to do, given that a lot of it was very blasphemous. Even now, when I say that I thought my mom was lying, it's like my heart is going, that's not good. That's not good to say about your mom. you know, so everything about recalling the mother was pleasurable for me because it was a way of, it was recall. It was about remembering that you're putting her back together and that she's with you again. So even as a lot of it is very blasphemous, and she would be very angry with everything that I wrote. So the stuff about my mom, I thought it was also funny bringing in the gossip about Tacloban, because Tacloban is such a minor place. At the same time, I make it so big in my novel, and just bringing back weird political moments like the kidnapping. The Marcoses kidnapped their son-in-law. And people in Tacloban thought he was just hiding on one of the islands nearby. It's very funny. So just bringing in those bullshit things that I think, as I said, the obstruction was, if I remembered it, then I'm going to put it in. So, yeah.
I love when Imelda shows up.
Yeah.
The narrator's like,
with her
where
hair.
did this orchestra come from? And then you just have that line, like, she's like, how did this orchestra just appear? And then you just say, why do birds?
Why do birds?
It's a great Karen Carpenter reference, right? Why do birds suddenly appear? Right? Like, and it totally fits that moment. And it's surreal. So yes, she was Imelda, and she was also from this small place.
Because this is just my experience. I'm just going to my stupid high school reunion, and Imelda's there kissing all of us. It's like, what the fuck? It's like a very weird thing, to be analyzing power, and then it's just there, being stupid.
I think that the Marcoses, when they settled in Hawaii, that the house
was
not like just down the road from my house. I'm telling you.
Like one day, my friend said, "Gina, let's go. Come to New York. Come to New York." I said, "They said there's a big party. It'll be fun." I said, "What's the party?" "Oh, Imelda she just won her case, and she's going to throw a big party." I was like, "Fuck you! I'm not going." And then, of course, later on, I realized I should have gone because I'm a writer. But I'm like, no, that is so wrong.
You can imagine it instead. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience.
We do have a question, and I'll encourage all viewers, please feel free if you have a question for Gina to submit it in the Q&A. And so our question is from Laurel, and Gina, I believe you may have touched on this a bit when Ligaya asked you about, this is your first novel writing from your life. But Laurel writes, my question is, how does writing about grief and giving it to a book change your day-to-day relationship to grief, or does it?
Yeah, I think it's a relieving thing. I think that the act of writing, and I think maybe that was why I actually finished a novel during the pandemic. It was relieving to do that recall. There was a kind of joy in that. So it does relieve it. I do think about grief. And I think so many of us, and again, just a kind of a trigger, so many of us have experienced many different ways of grieving during the pandemic. And I think so many of us share the sense that grieving never ends, that it's just endless. There's just something about grief that is both a matter of daily existence, as well as something that can be quite destroying. So what I think was interesting about dealing with grief straight on with this novel was that there was a kind of relieving, a kind of way into having a memory that was not going to kill me, that was not going to destroy me, that in fact it was just living with it in this, I'll just use that Freudian term, with ordinary unhappiness, and that is a goal. That is my goal. And I think that, so yeah, it was a relief. And I think that was a change, to be honest.
Dovetailing on this, Grace writes, do you consider this novel autofiction? And Grace adds, maybe categories don't matter, but I see this term used more often recently, and I've been curious about what the term autofiction even means.
Yeah, I don't actually know what it means, and I don't know what those books are. Is there a book? But I don't know what those books are. I just know that it was something for me, it was just me, my own experience as being a writer. I am actually pretty conscious about not. Like, I don't want my life. I don't want my, if anything comes in, it's a lot of it is kind of, I only recognize it later when the book is done, when someone talks about something. So I grew up with Roland Barthes saying, the death of the author is dead. And I really believed it. And there's something about it that's really helpful for me as a writer, to say the author is dead, even in the way I'm talking about this very personal novel now, to call memory an obstruction, a way to get writing done, a way to structure my day, my writing page. That is already very much part of death of an author type thing. So I don't know what autofiction is. I think maybe it's the reader who will decide what it is.
I have a question from my old friend and colleague Mairead, who writes, thank you for this wonderful start to the day. I loved what you were saying, Gina, about translation as allowing a logic of fragmentation. Can you talk a little bit more about how your work complicates the narrative of translation itself? I'm thinking of Insurrecto and how translation is not a straightforward kind of utopian good there. The translator is a figure that's wonderfully hard to read.
Yeah, right. The translator as a figure that's hard to read. I love that point. And it's not straightforwardly good, not straightforwardly bad. Also, that there's a complication in the acts of translation that we do. The act of translation is, I think, in my view, what we're always trying to do, even right now in this conversation, where we're trying to hear each other, we're trying to explain, even with the question that we're asking, we're trying to say something about ourselves or about our concerns, about something that we want to put out there in the world, and we're phrasing it as a question, or I'm giving my answer in a way that, is trying to explain a meaning, that as you notice is always very multiple. There's the meaning of the author, there's the meaning of art, there's the meaning of the personal, there's the meaning of the daughter, there's the meaning of the mother. So the narrative of translation itself, that it complicates. I think what it's just saying is that that our acts of language are necessarily complex acts, but in order to communicate with the other, we have to imagine them as simple. We have to imagine them as, so we were not going to interrogate why we asked the question here, or why I gave you that answer here, in the moment of doing our our conversation right now. But in a novel, you can actually do the commentary. You can actually do a meta where you're actually telling people how, in fact, what we consider quite simple, our ways of communication or an act of translation, a book, is actually really quite, the ways we read are actually always complicated, but we need, in order to go chronological one minute after another, to imagine it's simple. A book allows the complication.
Thank you. Jerry writes, your works are a living archive of storytelling forms, from family gossip to art films. What do the movies do for you?
Movies. I wish movies did more for me. I find myself I'm a weird movie watcher. I get really involved. I can't, or even watching I love soccer, but even watching Messi's last game with Argentina in the World Cup, it's like, I can't do it. My body response, I had to stop. I had to go upstairs and not watch the penalty kicks. So storytelling for me slows down, and I'm in charge. I'm in control when I'm writing a novel. I know if my novel is very complicated and seemingly so mysterious in many different ways, like Insurrecto, I actually know all the clues, so I'm like, oh, I know all the clues. I'm not gonna, I keep writing the book because I have control, but movies, I don't have control. And I get very sucked into, as a kid, I was frightened by Pinocchio. Pinocchio just scared the hell out of me. I had to run out of the movie theater because he was in a whale. I was like, no, don't go into the whale. So I just have that visceral response to movies that is very different from my response to books.
Thank you. And then we just have one question here from Bren, who writes, can you tell us about the book cover design of La Tercera?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. I had nothing to do with it. A writer's clause in the contract never has, unless you're, I think, Stephen King or whatever, you never have cover authority. It's the work of the editor, the publisher. It's the work of the publisher and the distributor. So those two. So it would be Penguin and Soho. And I don't have control at all. But what they do is they show me the cover and they ask me, what I think of it. And I was very happy with this one. I showed it to my siblings and they all said, oh yeah, that's their hairdo. That's their hairdo. The hairdo of the 70s. My mom in the 70s, the people, Filipino, we call them imeldific, the imeldific hairdo. Yeah, so, and again, the use of the maps, I thought, was very interesting. I did ask them, the only tweak I asked them to do, and they did it, was I asked them to center Tacloban and Samar, Leyte and Samar more in the map, and they did, and then that moved Manila, somewhere else. So it was really, so that was interesting. Yeah, so. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a few more minutes. So Ligaya, if you had one last question for Gina, I'm happy to cede the floor back to you to close.
I want to know more about the book that ends with the closing of the window.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now in Rome. I want to do a novel. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been really interested in women and women's voices and the role of women in the history that we're doing, and that we know, the histories that we know. So I'm very interested right now I'm writing a novel. I'm thinking about the woman, the wife of Juan Luna, the great Filipino painter, whose painting is so great that when you enter the National Museum, the first big wall that you see is just covered with spoliarium, his painting Spoliarium, which is a dying Roman gladiator being dragged to what you call the spoliarium, the room of the rotting corpses. And I learned that it says, it's right there on the painting, Luna Roma. So he actually learned to be a painter in Rome. And so I pitched this to the Rome Prize, this is why I'm in Rome. And so that's why I'm Rome. I'm studying what it would have been like for Luna to be a painter, but I'm really more interested in his wife. So he did bring his wife here on the honeymoon. So that's why I know it's really important. He brought his wife Paz for their honeymoon to Rome, to Venice, and to Florence. So Italy was really important in the making of Juan Luna. In my view, it liberated him in some ways because it wasn't Spain. It was a different. And there's so Rome is the happy part of my novel because it's the honeymoon part. He killed his wife, so that's not good. So he killed his wife and his mother-in-law in Paris. So I want to tell her story. Her story is she's never pulled out, she's never seen. And I do think that there's something about a way of thinking about nation, complicating the concept of nation by looking at the woman figure. So that's what I'm doing. But at the same time, I'm really just enjoying Rome and, wandering around.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So.
Well, we've reached the top of our hour here at Home with Literati. Can't think of a better way to start our week and morning than this conversation with Ligaya Mishan and Gina Apostol. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for you, Gina, and the early evening of Rome there. I hope to have you on anytime. I think this is our third time with you, Gina. Hopefully sometime in the store in the not too distant future. Ligaya, thank you so much for joining us and for your wonderful questions. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us this morning at Home with Literati. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Literati. I love this bookstore. So please go to the bookstore, buy their books. Bye. Bye, Ligaya.